November 9th, 1989. In an East Berlin International Press Center, an official named Günter Schabowski sat before a room of reporters. Nearing the end of a routine briefing, he was handed a piece of paper he had not read in advance. A reporter asked about new travel regulations. Schabowski shuffled his notes, skimmed the text, and declared that East Germans could cross the border. When asked exactly when this took effect, he fumbled, scratched his head, and replied, "Immediately." We expect the great standoffs of history to end through careful treaties or decisive military victories. The conflict that held the world hostage to the threat of nuclear war for 4 decades did not end that way. The defining physical barrier of the Cold War collapsed primarily because a mid-level functionary misspoke during a live broadcast. And the moment those words went out over the airwaves, a ticking clock started on the streets of Berlin. To understand how a single sentence could break a nation, we have to look at how East Germany was held together. The heavily fortified border consisted of concrete barricades, watchtowers, and a lethal cleared area known as the Death Strip, designed to stop citizens from fleeing. Internal control relied on the Stasi, whose pervasive network of civilian informants effectively isolated citizens, preventing organized opposition. But this surveillance system relied on an external threat, the absolute certainty that Soviet tanks would crush any massive uprising. That certainty evaporated in the late 1980s. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced sweeping reforms and withdrew the promise of military intervention in the Eastern Bloc. Without the threat of Soviet armor, the chain of fear broke. For the first time in decades, the East German leadership stood completely isolated, facing a frustrated public with no foreign army to save them. The pressure began to build over the summer of 1989. When neighboring Hungary relaxed its border controls, tens of thousands of East Germans found an escape route, abandoning their homes and fleeing to the west. Those who stayed behind began to organize. Operating under the surveillance of the state, citizens found the only available sanctuary in Protestant places of worship, like St. Nicholas Church in the city of Leipzig. What started as small Monday evening peace prayers steadily grew. By the fall, the attendees were spilling out of the church pews and into the city squares, forming massive, spontaneous street demonstrations. The regime prepared to strike back. In October, police and army units were authorized to use armed force to disperse the crowds in Leipzig. Hospitals even set up emergency triage centers in anticipation of extreme violence. But when 70,000 people marched through the streets holding candles, the military commanders hesitated. Faced with citizens who were entirely peaceful, the troops pulled back. Not a single shot was fired. The decision not to fire signaled a breakdown in the regime's willingness to use its final deterrent. For the first time, the movement on the streets had effectively outsized the government's ability to contain it. Desperate to relieve the mounting pressure, the East German leadership tried to offer a concession. They drafted a slightly relaxed travel law intended to simplify the process of applying for exit visas. That brings us back to November 9. The new rules were supposed to be strictly controlled and implemented the following day, but the unfinished draft was handed to Günter Schabowski just moments before he sat down in front of the cameras. When Schabowski mistakenly announced that citizens could travel immediately, West German television networks picked up the feed. They broadcast the news straight back into East Berlin, reporting that the government had opened the borders. The regime thought they were creating a carefully managed bureaucratic valve. Instead, their miscommunication sent thousands of East Berliners rushing out of their homes and heading directly for the checkpoints. A massive crowd quickly converged on the Bornholmer Straße border checkpoint, demanding that the guards honor the television broadcast and let them through to West Berlin. Inside the checkpoint, the commanding Stasi officer, Harald Jäger, was caught completely off guard. He repeatedly called his superiors for instructions, but the leadership was utterly confused. No one knew what Schabowski had done, and no one would give Jäger a clear order. Outside, the situation was rapidly and dangerously deteriorating. The crowd had swelled to an estimated 20,000 people. The sheer physical weight of the citizens pushing forward caused the iron fences to buckle. Jäger looked at the agitated crowd and realized his men were heavily outnumbered. He had 2 choices: order his troops to open fire and trigger a massacre, or commit treason by opening the gates without authorization. The decades-long standoff between nuclear superpowers had narrowed down to the moral decision of one man at a single gate, left to act without support or orders from his government. At 11:30 p.m., Jäger made his decision. Fearing for the lives of his staff and the civilians outside, he disobeyed standing orders and commanded his guards to open the barrier. The crowd surged forward. Thousands of East Berliners streamed across the bridge into West Berlin, met by cheering crowds on the other side. Within an hour, the remaining checkpoints across the city followed suit. Before the sun came up on November 10th, citizens from both sides climbed to the top of the concrete dividers. Using nothing more than household hammers and chisels, they physically chipped away at the barrier. Long before heavy machinery arrived to haul away the rubble, the true structure of the wall, the psychological enforcement of absolute state fear, had already been dismantled. The opening of the checkpoints triggered a rapid chain reaction. The East German state collapsed, Germany formally reunified the following year, and the Soviet Union dissolved entirely shortly after. But 4 decades of opposing political systems left a deep imprint. Germans soon adopted a phrase, die Mauer im Kopf, the wall in the head, to describe the economic, cultural, and psychological divides that outlasted the concrete. Today, much of the death strip has been paved over or redeveloped. The exact path of the barrier is marked by a subtle line of cobblestones weaving quietly through the traffic and pedestrians of a united capital. It stands as a physical reminder of how brittle authoritarian control actually is. Governments can draw lines on maps and reinforce them with concrete and rifles, but ultimately, it only takes the collective defiance of ordinary people to walk right through them.